Welcome to the Tinfoil Rabbit Hole, the show that goes deeper than just the page one search results. I am your host, the White Rabbit. This show comes to you from deep down within our tinfoil rabbit hole. It's from there where we'll discuss the strange, the odd, the mysterious, and the unexplained. We'll explore every subject with its accepted definition and understanding, and dive deep into the interweb in search of alternative possibilities. So I invite you to put on your tinfoil hat and stay with me a while inside my tinfoil rabbit hole. Episode 4, Fuel for Thought. Last week we discussed fossil fuels and how these energy sources have a twisted and cloudy background. We heard Fletcher Prouty tell the story of how these substances came to be known by their common name fossil fuels and how they were presented to the public in a misleading and unscrupulous way. We discovered that there may be another way that the earth produces substances like oil that doesn't involve dead, decaying matter and millions upon millions of years. We heard how it may be possible that we never run out of it. We also covered how the Earth's population has been manipulated through the use of scarcity, leading the public to falsely believe that the days of oil mining were soon coming to an end. It is hard to imagine a world that doesn't run on these energy sources. And while people and governments may press the issue of a Green New Deal, there is no denying that we will require fossil fuels for a very long, foreseeable future. The simple fact of the matter is that without energy, we would be doomed as a species. Our technology-driven, highly mobile society requires vast amounts of energy, and mankind's requirements are not going down anytime soon. But we are going down deep into my tinfoil rabbit hole. We take our electricity for granted. Think about the last time you lost power at your home. No power for a few hours to half a day was more of an inconvenience than anything else. No power for a day to a few days, a small crisis. No power for a week or longer is enough to cause mass social disruptions. Most power interruptions are small scale, affecting a neighborhood or a few blocks. The last major outage to hit the United States was in 2003, the Northeast blackout. According to Wikipedia, the Northeast blackout of 2003 was a widespread power outage throughout parts of the northeastern and midwestern United States, along with the Canadian province of Ontario. This monster blackout began at 4:10 p.m. Eastern Time on August 14th, 2003. By 11 p.m., some power had been restored, but most did not get their power back until 2 days later. The majority of other blacked out areas took nearly a week or two for power to be restored. At that time, It was the world's second most widespread blackout in history. The outage, which was more widespread than the previous Northeast blackout of 1965, affected an estimated 10 million people in southern and central Ontario and 45 million people in 8 U.S. states. The blackout's cause, we're told, was attributed to a software bug in an alarm system at the control room of First Energy, an Akron, Ohio-based company, which rendered operators unaware of the need to redistribute load after overloaded transmission lines drooped into foliage. What should have been a manageable local blackout cascaded into the collapse of the entire Northeast region. The White Rabbit finds it hard to believe how one company with a software bug in their system could cause a mass blackout of this scale. It's hard to know for sure what happened on August 14th, but some scientists never felt that it was a natural occurrence. Was the grid shut down by friendly aliens or elementals trying to abort some nefarious plans of the Illuminati and their alien overlords? Did the Illuminati rig the event in order to justify further government intervention and designed to ultimately jack up the cost of electricity for consumers, yielding greater profits for global corporate Illuminati fat cats? The Northeast grid is relied upon by the Northeast US and Southeast Canada. It is a region that a large-scale outage would not have a really devastating effect on the economy or military control centers. The event conveniently began a few minutes after the closing bell on Wall Street, so as not to affect the day's trading, but while power usage in the Northeast on that hot day was still at a peak. It began in a bottleneck region where only a few percent increase in power flow could cause such a critical failure of the entire grid. The physical cause of the event, such as a classic squirrel shorting out a transformer, has not been found. There were no indications of any lightning being present, nor was there any significant solar activity to cause an unexpected surge in the grid. Finally, the HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project, was turned on just after 4 p.m. Eastern on that fateful day. The White Rabbit asks, could this have been a secret HAARP experiment that caused the blackout? Interesting ionospheric events occurred on August 14, 2003, that would have made the conditions for such a secret military test ideal, including a widespread, highly reflective ionospheric layer. Unfortunately, the ionospheric data that would help show where the effects of HAARP were directed by providing a picture of the ionosphere were not posted on the day of the blackout. What we do know is that HAARP was turned on at or just after 4 p.m. It would take a few minutes for the target area to respond, which would allow a 9-minute event to knock the power out at 4:14 p.m. Was HAARP an ultimately military, governmental, or more clandestine groups responsible for this event? Was it a practice for something yet to come? Was it a social experiment? It took years for a final report to be issued. The White Rabbit believes there was more to this blackout than we've been told, but that is not untypical for events of this scale. The White Rabbit wonders if so-called fossil fuels contain the elements hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen when they're dead. They must contain them when they're alive. So can we produce energy from living matter? Bioenergy? Keep your tinfoil on, because once again, we're going down into my tinfoil rabbit hole to look at a literal green method of energy production that remains mysterious and mischievous at the same time. Wikipedia says that algae fuel, algae biofuel, or algae oil is an alternative to liquid fossil fuels that use algae as its source of energy-rich oils. Like fossil fuel, algae fuel releases CO2 when burned, but unlike fossil fuel, algae fuel and other biofuels only release CO2 that have been recently removed from the atmosphere via photosynthesis as the algae or plant grew, making it a short or real-time consumption and release process. The United States Department of Energy estimates that if algae fuel replaced all the petroleum fuel in the United States, it would only require 15,000 square miles, or about half of the land area of Maine, to produce it. If we are already producing oil from algae sources, how do we know that the energy companies like Big Oil aren't duping the world's population? If this is indeed a viable replacement for crude from the ground, are they only giving the appearance of drilling for oil by farming algae already? It would certainly be beneficial for energy companies to be deceitful, as their revenue would increase greatly given this less expensive method to produce fuel. In what he describes as the mother of all conspiracy theories, an Arizona-based talk radio host says the powers that be are intentionally destroying large bodies of water in a bid to create a multi-trillion-dollar biofuel industry. According to Dave Hodges, this tinfoil conspiracy involves the Obama administration and many others, such as individual billionaires, select politicians, companies like BP, Exxon, GM, GE, Goldman Sachs, the University of Chicago, and many others, including the Department of Defense, all of which, he says, are deeply invested in biofuels. Hodges lays out what he believes is taking place. He claims globalists, through their government minions, are in the process of destroying massive bodies of water, including the Chesapeake Bay, the Great Lakes, the Mississippi River, and the Gulf of Mexico. He claims this destruction is not because of neglect. It is willful destruction, with very ulterior motives in mind. He claims they are using nitrates from fertilizer to accomplish their desire to create a dead zone in the aforementioned bodies of water. He claims that these man-made water dead zones would allow the proliferation of algae growth, and the oil companies have initially led the charge to convert our energy usage from oil to algae. He states prominent globalists are attempting to buy up as much water as possible to exacerbate the destruction of those resources. In other words, Americans are looking at extreme water scarcity from which the globalists can wage war and force submission to their will, while at the same time carry out their stated depopulation agenda. One way to create these dead zones is through farming runoff, he states. Farmers apply nitrogen fertilizer to their crops in a bid to boost yields, overloading the soil with compound. Plants will absorb 30 to 50% of it, he says, but the rest, up to 87 pounds per acre, will run off into the nearest body of water. The only thing that grows in a nitrogen-rich, watery environment is algae. Nitrogen has a decided evil side, as it is creating huge problems with major bodies of water that we are only now beginning to understand. The EPA is aware of the problem, yet remains silent on the issue. Hodges says Obama is neck deep in the conspiracy. He says the president himself telegraphed his intentions in a March 15th announcement calling for a shift away from oil to biofuels. Former President Obama was noted as saying, "I'm proposing that we take some of our oil and gas revenues from public lands and put it towards the research that will benefit the public so that we can support American ingenuity without adding a dime to our deficit, devising new ways to fuel our cars and trucks with new energy, clean energy, like advanced biofuels." Hodges also ties in John Holdren, former chief climate advisor to Obama, who proposed geoengineering the world's oceans, ostensibly to battle climate change. Hodges, defending the statement, states, "Isn't it an interesting coincidence that the president's science advisor, John Holdren, in 2009, advocated for fertilizing the oceans? I remember that most people thought Holdren had lost his mind when he proposed this as a solution for global warming. However, in the context of creating dead zones through the use of nitrogen fertilizers, his suggestion makes a great deal of sense in light of today's heightened interest in biofuels. For now, we'll have to take it all with a grain of algae. Grab your tinfoil radiation suit and a Geiger counter. This tinfoil rabbit hole is lead-lined for our own protection. Nuclear power is a player in the energy market, but it comes with a stigma, and people misunderstand it and are fearful. More so now after a core meltdown at Chernobyl and a tsunami in Japan that took out the Fukushima power plant. However, nuclear power is viable. The United States produces the most nuclear energy in the world, with nuclear power providing 19% of the electricity it consumes. Nuclear power is the use of nuclear reactions to release nuclear energy to generate heat, which most frequently is then used in steam turbines to produce electricity within the nuclear power plant. Nuclear power is generally obtained from nuclear fission. Presently, the vast majority of electricity from nuclear power is produced by nuclear fission of uranium and plutonium. However, there are debates about nuclear power. Proponents such as the World Nuclear Association contend that nuclear power is a safe, sustainable energy source and has one of the lowest levels of fatalities per unit of energy generated compared to other energy sources. Nuclear power also has one of the lowest carbon emissions. However, nuclear opponents such as Greenpeace contend that nuclear power poses many threats to people and the environment. In August of 1945, the first widely distributed account of nuclear energy, the pocketbook The Atomic Age, was released. It discussed the peaceful future uses of nuclear energy and depicted a future where fossil fuels would go unused. Electricity was generated for the first time by a nuclear reactor on December 20th, 1951. In 1953, President Dwight Eisenhower gave his Atoms for Peace speech at the United Nations, where he emphasized the need to develop peaceful uses of nuclear power quickly. He followed this up with the Atomic Energy Act of 1954, which allowed rapid declassification of U.S. reactor technology and encouraged development by the private sector. Most nuclear power plants utilize uranium, which has a typical lifespan of 6 years inside the reactor. Uranium is a fairly common element in the Earth's crust. It is approximately as common as tin or germanium, and is about 40 times more common than silver. It is naturally present in seawater at a concentration of about 3 micrograms per liter. There is roughly 4.5 billion tons of uranium in present seawater at any time. However, there is an alternative that has yet to be explored: thorium. Thorium is a weakly radioactive metal. It's silvery and tarnishes black when it's exposed to air. It's estimated to be over 3 times as abundant as uranium in the Earth's crust, and it has been suggested as a replacement for uranium as nuclear fuel in nuclear reactors. However, the world has been reluctant to institute thorium reactors. According to proponents, a thorium fuel cycle offers several potential advantages over a uranium fuel cycle, including much greater abundance of thorium, superior physical and nuclear fuel properties, and reduced nuclear waste production. Proponents also cite the lack of easy weaponization potential as an advantage of thorium. Some believe thorium is key to developing a new generation of cleaner, safer nuclear power. A group of scientists at the Georgia Institute of Technology state that considering its overall potential, thorium-based power could mean a 1,000-plus year solution, or a quality low-carbon bridge to truly sustainable energy sources, solving a huge portion of mankind's negative environmental impact. Science writer Richard Martin stated that nuclear physicist Alvin Weinberg, who was the director at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, lost his job as director because he championed development of safe thorium reactors. Martin states that Weinberg's unwillingness to sacrifice potentially safe nuclear power for the benefit of military uses forced him to retire. Weinberg had realized that you could use thorium in an entirely new kind of reactor, one that would have zero risk of meltdown. Weinberg spent 18 years trying to make thorium the heart of the nation's atomic power effort. He failed. Uranium reactors had already been established as the de facto head of nuclear U.S. programs. Plutonium from uranium-powered nuclear power plants was needed by the military to make bombs. Despite the documented history of thorium nuclear power, many of today's nuclear experts are unaware of it. According to a documentary, if the U.S. had not discontinued its research into thorium in 1974, it could have probably achieved energy independence by around 2000. As of 2020, there are no operational thorium reactors in the world. Our society is dependent on vast amounts of power, yet our technologies seem to be old and inefficient, as well as requiring large amounts of natural resources. There must be other ways to meet our needs, right? Or are there already, and they are being kept from the public, keeping us slaves to the large multinational energy corporations? It's difficult to not follow the money and power that comes with providing what our society needs and uses to grow and thrive. Sadly, our time in the tinfoil rabbit hole has come to an end. The White Rabbit hopes you enjoyed your time here and invites you to return and visit with him again in the tinfoil rabbit hole.
Where the hell is Tesla?